All right, what we're about to do is to accomplish the impossible, or at least we'll take a shot. What we'd like to do is cover 1,000 years of history from the fall of the Roman Empire, let's say around 500 AD, to the beginning of the Renaissance and the Reformation in the 16th century or the 1500s. So that's a long ways to go in a short time, and let's see how we do. So this lightning fast trip that we do um, will be describing for us what is sometimes called the Middle Ages, or even parts of it are called the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages are called that, this 1,000 year period, because it's from the fall of Rome and to the revitalization of Roman culture in the Renaissance. What it misses is the fact that that culture has been preserved in the monasteries throughout the Middle Ages. And so the Middle Ages, the area in between, don't let the fact that it's just called the middle, as if nothing of importance happened between the fall of Rome and the revitalization of Roman culture. A lot happened, and it deserves a better name. Also, it's part of it is sometimes called the Dark Ages. But remember that the education and learning was preserved and even promoted, as we'll see, by the monasteries. So let's take a look. We're going to go century by century, talk about some of the things that happened during that time. Some of them I'll describe in detail, others I'll just list for you. Now, here's what you can do if you'd like to take notes. This video will be short, but you can pause it at any time, take the notes that are on the screen, and then move on. All right, so remember the Middle Ages are between the fall of Rome and the revitalization of Rome, and that it's not near as dark as we might think. Let me explain. So, at the beginning, right after the fall of the Roman Empire, we have the rise of a couple of things. We have the beginning of missions, as it were, with regard to two monks heading for Scotland to evangelize the Picts. And so that's missionary work happening. We have the Rule of St. Benedict, which we've talked about in other videos, is written in 529, and Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy is written in 524. So fall of the Roman Empire, but already things are advancing. Between 600 and 700 AD, we have the Bishop of Rome, Gregory the Great, soon to be called Pope, sends out monks and evangelists and is responsible for the beginnings of evangelization and promotion into Europe. And then we have in 622 the founding of Islam. So that's the 7th century. The 8th century will see the oldest Germanic poem, Beowulf, written. It will have the Venerable Bede write the ecclesiastical history of the English people. And then the iconoclastic controversy begins, mainly between the Eastern and the Western Church, with regard to the value of icons versus the idolatry of images. So, depending on which side of the fence you are, they can be good teaching tools, or they can be something that is worshipped in place of the worship of Christ. So that's the iconoclastic controversy. In 800 to 900 AD, we have gunpowder being invented in China. We have Charlemagne's coronation and the biographies of Charlemagne by Einhard and by Notker the Stammerer are completed by, let's say, 830 AD. And then later on, the Vikings are defeated and turned back from England by Alfred the Great. So all of a sudden, when you see these little points of uh, dates with events, you think, there's a world behind each of these things that is going on, progressing, and we have the opportunity to learn as much as we can about each of these bullet points along the way. So we're going to go on to 900 to 1000 AD. The church has advanced into Russia, and Vladimir and his 12 sons are baptized at Kiev. So between 1000 and 1100 AD, we have the Great Schism, in which the church splits ultimately and finally between Eastern and Western churches. The Pope of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople, the heads of the the heads of the Western Church and the Eastern Church excommunicate each other. So that is the permanent division between the two churches. Anselm writes Cur Deus Homo in defense of the doctrine of Christ being both God and man. Then you have the investiture controversy beginning in this century. The investiture controversy is, does the church or the state have the right to choose its own religious figures? So if you're a strong politician, are you allowed to choose the representatives in the church? So investiture controversy has to do with who gets to choose the leaders in the church. And then in 1095, Pope Urban is traveling throughout Europe, beginning to recruit people to come and fight in the First Crusade and to deliver Jerusalem. In the 1100s, we will have a second crusade, that one incited by Bernard of Clairvaux. We will have the death of Anselm, the Bishop of Canterbury, great writer and theologian. We'll have the death of Peter Abelard. We will have Oxford founded, and we will have the Third Crusade as well. This one is Richard the Lionheart. And then Geoffrey of Monmouth writes the history of the kings of Britain. So we are already halfway through our survey, more than halfway through our survey of the history of the Middle Ages. Remember, each of these has a story to tell, and it's worth taking a look at in more detail. Between 1200 and 1300, then we have a fourth crusade. We will actually have several crusades beyond the fourth, but they will be smaller, they will be minor, and this one ends with the sacking of Constantinople, which you're probably wondering, what does that have to do with Jerusalem? And that is a great historical question. Then we have St. Francis of Assisi. We have Aquinas Summa written. We have the Adventures of Marco Polo published. We have the Mongol Empire rising under Genghis Khan. We have the King of England forced to recognize the rights of man in the Magna Carta. So when you see that John of England signs the Magna Carta, don't necessarily think, nice job, John of England. It was part of it was pressure to put the rights of people, human beings, down in writing. Then we have in 1292, we have one of the earliest advocates of the scientific method in Roger Bacon. So there we are. Again, pretty exciting century for the Middle Ages. Lots of things happening and worth taking a closer look at. You can see now that we're beginning to bend things toward the Renaissance. We're beginning to bend things at the close of this century toward the renewing of Roman culture and the renewing of education and knowledge. That said, though, we have the writing of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We have the Babylonian captivity of the church. What this means is between those dates, we have two popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon, France. The church split. It was fragmented behind one or either of these two popes, and until 429, the issue of the rightful pope was not settled. So it's called the Babylonian captivity of the church when you have the church in two places. Then we have Dante's Divine Comedy published. We have the beginning of the Hundred Years' War between England and France. We have the bubonic plague between 1347 and 1350. Some 20 million people in Europe died. Between 20 and 40% of the population of Europe died in the first year of that plague. It was impossible to prevent the transmission of the disease from one person to another. You couldn't just wear a mask. And so the plague, especially where we come in close contact with each other and with rats and their fleas, um, cities were especially deadly. And so that is the bubonic plague. 1373, Julian of Norwich publishes her Revelations of Divine Love. 1378, the final break. We have the Great Schism in 1378. In 1380, we have Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And in 1382, John Wycliffe will produce his version of the Bible in English. So we see the beginnings, the, the heroes of the Reformation, the people to look back and see what they have done. So John Huss is burned at the stake in 1415. The Medici family is rising in Florence as bankers. In Korea in 1443, King Sejong creates the new Korean alphabet. And so he takes the windows of a door with rice paper, 4 quadrants, and he begins to create the sounds of the alphabet and gives them a written language. And that is 1443. Thomas Malory writes The Death of Arthur. Joan of Arc is executed. The end of Byzantium comes in 1453. The Gutenberg printing press, probably the most important thing that happened of all those things, is 1439, and close second would be in 1492. Columbus heads out to the New World, and so we have new direction, and suddenly a whole new world opens up to us. The Reformation is just on the cusp. Martin Luther is going to hang his 95 Theses in 1521 or 1518, and then we'll be on with the Reformation. So just a couple of thoughts. Why is there so much prejudice about the Middle Ages? Because as we've just seen, there's a lot of things happening in science, there's a lot of things happening in art, there's a lot of things happening in the church. And so here are 3 reasons why I think there's that prejudice. First is the church is really prominent during that 1,000-year period. There are conflicts with church and state issues, like the investiture controversy we talked about. There are conflicts within the church and conflicting loyalties, the Eastern Church, the Western Church. And so the church is sometimes the cause of the conflict and not the one coming in to help settle the conflict. So perhaps the role of the church, maybe you don't like so much church mixed into your state politics. And so that could be a reason why there's a bit of prejudice about the Middle Ages. Secondly is the Crusades. They are a dark spot on Christianity in large measure, not only for the wars and trying to reclaim Jerusalem, but mainly in the fact that we did things like the Children's Crusade, in which we thought, well, children will not be despised, and a little child should lead them. And so there was a crusade in which children were gathered up and brought on a children's crusade, trying to get them to the Holy Land to see if that would help to win the day for Christianity and for the freedom of Jerusalem. Well, they got down to the docks and the ports of Italy, and they were just sold as slaves. They never even got out of Europe. So sad stories about the Crusades. Um, and then, of course, we have the story of the plagues, which, however bad some of the epidemics that we have these days, we haven't had one in which 20 to 40% of Europe dies in a year's time. And so, for those three reasons, at least, I think maybe that's some of the cause for the prejudice that occurs during the Middle Ages. But we have men and women with great minds, great writing ability. We have the first writing of English in Julian of Norwich by a woman. We have that early Beowulf, earliest Germanic poem. We have lots of things, and I suspect that there is so much more out there yet to be discovered. So I hope you're willing to be a part of it. Thanks for joining me.